Hey folks, welcome back to Animal Quest. Today in this episode, I'll show you what happens when people mistake one of nature's macabre creatures for nothing more than a furred mammal. From an Instagram model trying to pose with the furry animal to caretakers who stepped on the bear's wrong nerve. Let's begin with the case of Anna Brown, an aspiring social media model whose search for the perfect photograph ended in a tragedy that wildlife officials had spent years trying to prevent. It was July 18, 2021, along a narrow stretch of river inside Katmai National Park, Alaska, not far from the famous falls where bears are known to gather each summer. Summer had rapidly changed the landmarks. Melted snow fed countless rivers flowing toward the coast, bringing with them one of the most important seasonal events in North America: salmon. Every year, thousands of fish returned upstream to spawn, and wherever salmon gathered in tight, narrow channels like this one, brown bears followed. This stretch of river becomes a hunting ground for bears, where a dozen or more powerful grizzlies gathered within sight of one another, all drawn by the same run of fish. For wildlife photographers, it represented a remarkable sight, a scenic view of the bears. On the other hand, for park rangers, it represented one of the busiest and most demanding seasons of the year. Because where bears gather, people inevitably follow. Guides and rangers patrolled the viewing platforms constantly, radios in hand, watching both the water and the crowd. Anna Brown was 26 years old, a rising Instagram model with a following built entirely on curated outdoor shots. Her feed was a highlight reel of poses against impossible backdrops, and her followers knew her angles and outfits better than they knew her actual life. She loved wild animals, or at least loved being photographed near them, and getting an animal into frame was the surest way to rack up likes and new followers. To me, Anna wasn't just an animal lover. She was a clout-chasing Instagram model, and that distinction is what got her killed. That morning, Anna had set out to see the bears and other spectacular wildlife. She joined several visitors exploring designated viewing areas near one of the rivers. Park staff had already delivered the protocol briefing to ensure the safety of the travelers. There had rarely been any hiccups in the past, but this day was going to be different, and no one knew. The standard briefing included one simple rule: seclusion. Leave the bears alone, and they'll do the same. Most importantly, never approach bears or position yourself between a bear and the river it is using to feed. Those rules existed for a reason. Brown bears expend enormous amounts of energy during salmon season. Every successful catch contributes directly to surviving the coming winter. Interrupting that process creates unnecessary stress for the animal and unnecessary danger for people. For several hours, everything unfolded normally. Visitors observed from approved locations. Photographers captured remarkable images. Several bears fished along the riverbank without paying much attention to the people watching from a respectful distance. Most would have considered the day a success, but the biggest trouble was yet to come. Ever since she laid eyes on the bears, she couldn't resist but imagine herself being part of this view. A view so splendid, it'll do a number on social media. A view of the bears hunting fish is what everyone else captured, and to me, that blinds the eyes of the human. The difference appears small. In reality, it changes everything. Observation becomes participation. Distance becomes proximity, and when that happens, safety turns into absurdity. Witnesses later recalled seeing Anna slip away from the main viewing area during a brief lull when the nearest guide was helping another visitor with a camera. She walked downstream toward a quieter, narrower bend in the river. She believed the angle would place both herself and the landscape into a single frame. For several moments, nothing happened. The bear continued fishing. The river continued flowing. The silence convinced her that the animal had accepted her presence. And that's what makes things dangerous. Wildlife biologists frequently caution against exactly this assumption. A calm bear is not a passive bear. Most likely, it hasn't been provoked yet or hasn't paid attention, and if it does, it's going to cause a catastrophe. An animal focused on feeding may simply be tolerating a disturbance if that meant it could keep on eating in that place. It's only tolerating disturbance for the sake of food. And once the disturbance overrides the former, things change. Tolerance should never be mistaken for permission. As Anna continued repositioning herself near the water, she unknowingly reduced the distance, separating herself from a bear focused on fishing along the opposite bank, a bank barely more than a car's length away at this narrow bend. Much to the dismay of the people still at the main platform, several had already begun waving her back, feeling bamboozled by this display of carelessness. Investigators later concluded that changing wind conditions likely prevented the bear from fully recognizing her presence until she was much closer than either expected. Once the animal became aware of the unexpected human presence nearby, events unfolded rapidly. Bears can cover large distances within seconds, and that's what happened. Without her knowledge, Anna was struck. Moments ago, she was all smiles, posing into her digicam with the bear in sight. Seconds later, the bear exploded into a defensive charge, knocking her off balance with a powerful swipe before she could react. A single, devastating blow was enough. The pain made her instinctively scream. What was a scene of tomfoolery for the audience became a nightmare in seconds. She fell into shallow water, and the bear, still reacting to the perceived threat, struck her again before retreating back toward the tree line, leaving as quickly as it had charged. A guide who had heard the commotion reached the platform within moments and radioed for emergency evacuation, but the damage from those few seconds had already been catastrophic. Anna was airlifted out, but she did not survive her injuries. Authorities later stressed that the tragedy did not occur because the bear was unusually aggressive. It occurred because a wild predator engaged in one of the most important feeding periods of the year encountered a person who had unknowingly crossed the boundaries established to keep both species safe. The greatest mistake had not been taking photographs. It was the belief that taking a few steps further would cause no harm. And when a gamble is made with nature, it is usually always in nature's favor.
The next one didn't gamble with the wild directly, rather he forgot something basic: attentiveness.
It was September 9th, 2019, inside Glacier National Park, Montana. There is a flux of millions of visitors who travel through the park every year in search of the gigantic mountaintops and crystal clear lakes that are pristine and breathtaking. It also houses some of the most spectacular hiking trails in North America. Anton Foster was 31 years old. An experienced backpacker from Colorado, Anton was born for the outdoors. He had spent years exploring the grimness of wild areas throughout the western United States. Unlike inexperienced hikers who underestimated nature, Anton was sharp, quick-minded, and invested heavily in quality equipment. He always carried emergency supplies, always navigated maps efficiently, and planned his routes accordingly. The one thing he'd grown lax about was bear spray. He owned a canister, but more often than not, it stayed in his truck instead of on his hip, since he'd never once needed it. To Anton, the odds of a bad encounter felt close to zero. That's what years of quiet hikes had convinced him. And when confidence takes charge, vigilance takes a back seat. Anton had developed a habit that many modern hikers unknowingly share. He preferred hiking alone. The solitude allowed him to disconnect from his daily life. No conversations, no distractions, just the sound of nature. His previous hikes had gone smoothly, no wild encounters, and certainly no bears. Anton expected this hike to be nothing different. Throughout most of the hike, Anton wore noise-canceling earbuds while listening to music and podcasts. For him, hiking wasn't just a task, it was his jamming session. The decision seemed harmless at first, but any wildlife expert could call this a reckless decision that is comparable to playing with fire. Because in the wild, you never know for certain what can strike at any moment.
He thought he was enjoying the views of nature. In reality, it removed one of the most important senses a person has in bear country: hearing.
Wildlife officials routinely encourage hikers to make noise while traveling through dense vegetation. Conversations, footsteps, even occasional shouting. The objective is surprisingly simple: allow wildlife to detect humans long before humans detect wildlife. A bear that hears people coming usually has time to leave. A bear that is suddenly surprised has far fewer options. Anton began his hike shortly after sunrise, when a low morning fog still clung to the valley floor. The air was chilly, and as the trail dropped into thicker timber, that fog only thinned in patches instead of burning off. Most hikers usually end their hikes after dusk or slow down their path. Anton did the opposite. I honestly cannot comprehend how someone can risk such a thing. For several hours, everything unfolded exactly as planned. He crossed streams, stopped to photograph mountain vistas, paused occasionally to admire the scenery. Nothing suggested the day would become memorable. As the trail narrowed, thick vegetation began closing in along both sides. The music continued playing, his surroundings grew quieter, at least from his perspective. What Anton could not hear was movement somewhere beyond the vegetation. Investigators later concluded that a grizzly bear had been foraging near the trail. The animal was not stalking anyone. It was searching for food, completely unaware that a person was approaching from the opposite direction. Neither species recognized the other until the distance separating them had nearly disappeared. Wildlife biologists often describe these situations as the most dangerous type of bear encounter, not because the bear is unusually aggressive, but because surprise removes the opportunity for avoidance.
One moment, Anton was following the trail. Next, he found himself face to face with one of North America's most powerful mammals.
Anton, being completely lost in his zone, kept on walking, his pace firm and his posture straight. Without realizing, he walked too close to the bear, and turning back was no easy feat. Once he realized the danger he was in, he immediately took out the earphones and threw them onto the ground. His bear spray, the one piece of gear that might have changed everything, was miles behind him in the truck. This reaction was no exaggeration, as he had seen an 800-pound grizzly bear rummaging through the woods just a few meters away from him. Raced heartbeats, sweat-induced palms, and heavy breaths. What started as a meditating hike turned into a survival task. He slowly backed away until the worst thing happened. He tripped onto a log and fell, a commotion that not only startled the bear, but also made its defense mechanism active. The bear struck Anton with brute force as a defense mechanism, an attack so strong that it caused deep slashes in his body. Grisly indeed was the attack. Once the bear saw Anton's movement reduced, it sensed that the threat was over and it retreated, leaving Anton severely wounded. He was lucky the bear spared him and didn't claim him as his meal. But fate was still not on his side. Deep in the backcountry, Anton was alone, helpless, blood pouring out of his wounds. He needed immediate intervention, but there was none to give it to him. Like his bear spray, the satellite messenger he owned was sitting at home on a shelf, another piece of gear he'd grown used to leaving behind on easy day hikes. He managed only a short distance before his strength gave out, and he was unable to go any farther. His roommate wasn't expecting him back until well after dark, and with no way to call for help, he was left exposed as the night grew colder. Emergency responders were alerted after other hikers discovered Anton the next day, not far from where he'd fallen. It was already too late. Anton had succumbed to his wounds and the blood loss overnight. The investigation that followed found no evidence that the bear had been hunting him. Instead, officials concluded the animal had reacted to an unexpected close-range encounter in dense vegetation. The bear was not removed from the park.
The next case proves that experience alone doesn't make someone immune to attacks. In fact, experience can sometimes become the very thing that convinces people that the impossible simply can't happen.
It was November 22nd, 2018, near Novosibirsk, Russia. For years, a privately owned wildlife facility on the outskirts of the city had attracted visitors interested in seeing large predators up close. Among its biggest attractions were several adult brown bears that had been raised in captivity for much of their lives. To the public, they always appeared passive, non-confrontational, which indeed they were, familiar, almost domesticated. Slav Petrov was 52 years old. His entire life was spent around wild animals. Snakes, bears, lions, anything that sparked fears in others sparked curiosity in him. He was built differently, his peers described him. His fascination with the wild culminated in his professional career. Where others chased ordinary jobs behind a desk, Slav chose to spend his days beside the animals that terrified everyone else. For his entire life, he had worked with dangerous carnivores. He had fed the bears, cleaned their enclosures, and worked around them for years without any serious incidents, always relying on the facility's shift system, moving the bears into a separate holding pen before ever entering the main enclosure himself. The bears knew him. He knew the bears. Unfortunately, familiarity is not the same as control. People often mistake predictability for safety. The animal can act friendly one day and deadly the other. Humans foolishly believe that calm behavior has become permanent. Nature has never made that promise. Slav continued working as he had countless times before. On that particular afternoon, Slav noticed something unusual. A bear had been lying in the exact same position for hours, seemingly ignoring the routine call to move into the holding pen. No movements, no responses. This tremendously worried Slav, who thought the bear was either severely injured or had died. Assuming the enclosure was clear, and without confirming the shift gate had actually latched, he stepped inside to check on the animal.
To anyone watching, it looked like another ordinary day. Most life-changing moments begin exactly that way.
He first got no response, and worried for the bear's well-being, he moved closer. The bear got into a hunched, defensive position, a warning sign. But Slav failed to notice. He kept moving forward. Already agitated, the bear saw the opportunity to strike. When the distance shortened, Slav entered the striking range of the brown bear. It took this opportunity and launched an attack. This sudden movement deeply perturbed Slav and caught him off guard. Turns out, the bear had accidentally caught its paw on an exposed piece of metal in the enclosure and had deeply wounded it. The excruciating pain had kept it still and limping in place all day. Already in a vulnerable, pain-addled state, it saw anyone entering its space as a threat rather than a familiar caretaker, and it got straight into defense. At that moment, Slav wasn't a caretaker, he was an intruder, and I cannot imagine the horror he went through at that moment. The bear got on top of him and started vicious attacks. Within moments, the scene turned bloody. There were deep gashes over his body with severe injuries to the face. Outside the enclosure, another employee rushed to help Slav and get the bear off of him. Once Slav managed to break free from the grips of the bear, he rushed outside. bloodied, wounded, and deeply broken. His years of trust and care around the bears meant nothing in that instant. A single lapse stepping in before the shift gate was confirmed was enough for the bear's most primal instincts to take over. He was rushed to the hospital, and the injuries took a long time to recover from, with permanent scars to his face and chest. The conclusions reached afterward echoed throughout the wildlife community. Large predators do not become harmless because they recognize a familiar face. They do not abandon instinct because someone has cared for them since they were young. Experience may reduce risk. It does not eliminate it.
The next case demonstrates that not every bear encounter begins with a bear confinement or a deep forest. Sometimes the danger walks directly into places people call home.
It was September 29, 2016, near Kelowna, British Columbia. The Okanagan Valley is famous for its rolling hills, vineyards, and some of Canada's largest fruit orchards. Every autumn, thousands of acres of apple, pear, and cherry trees reach harvest season, attracting farmers from sunrise until long after dusk. Unfortunately, the fruit is not only loved by humans, but also by bears. Black bears have inhabited the valley for centuries. As summer gives way to fall, they enter a biological stage known as hyperphagia, a period during which they consume enormous amounts of food in preparation for winter. During these weeks, bears spend nearly every waking hour searching for calories, often traveling wide distances in search of food to prepare for the upcoming winter. Ripened fruit provides exactly that. Wildlife officers throughout British Columbia receive hundreds of bear-related calls every autumn. In many cases, the bears are not venturing into towns because they prefer human environments. They are following food. And once a bear discovers a dependable meal, it often returns until that opportunity disappears. Andrew Mercer was 58 years old. He had owned and operated a family orchard for more than 3 decades. Neighbors respected him. Local growers admired his work ethic. He knew every section of his property, every irrigation line, and every tree that had been planted by previous generations. For him, his family orchard was more than just trees and fruit, but a family heirloom that must be protected at all costs. Experience had taught Andrew nearly everything about growing fruit. Over the years, he had spotted bears at a distance more than once, usually slipping along the tree line at dusk, but he had never had one linger close to the house, and he had certainly never come face to face with one. That was about to change. It all began when he started noticing his apples rapidly disappearing into the night and not surviving their attachment to the trees.
For several mornings, he noticed the same problem. Freshly fallen apples had disappeared overnight. Broken branches appeared beneath several trees along the edge of the property.
Large footprints remained pressed into the soft ground after each visit. Repeated occurrences solidified the culprit in his mind: bears. A black bear had discovered the orchard. Food-conditioned bears present challenges for everyone involved. The longer the food remains available, the stronger the bear's routine becomes. Day by day, Andrew was becoming more infuriated. He wanted to put an end to this. Andrew believed he could solve the problem himself. After all, he had spent decades working the land. The bear had never caused serious trouble before. Perhaps it simply needed to be frightened away once. A thought only a person inexperienced with bears would think of. The following morning, Andrew woke before sunrise. The air remained cool, and a light fog settled across sections of the orchard. Visibility was limited beneath the rows of trees, where shadows lingered long after daybreak. To Andrew, it looked like another ordinary workday. Wildlife experts later explained that orchards create ideal conditions for unexpected encounters. Dense rows of trees reduce visibility. The scent of ripened fruit masks other odors. Both people and bears move quietly through the same narrow spaces, often unaware of one another until they are already far too close. Andrew walked toward the section of the orchard where the fallen fruit had been disappearing. He had a long cane with him, perhaps to teach the bear a lesson. What ended up happening was quite the opposite. Upon finding the bear, he took his cane and struck it, expecting it to run like a wild rabbit or deer. But what Andrew didn't expect was retaliation.
The bear, who was enjoying itself seconds ago, was startled by this attack and retaliated. This wasn't about the apples anymore, it was about survival. The bear felt cornered and did what it knew best.
It bit at Andrew's face and knocked him to the ground. Andrew tried to free himself, but a 300-pound black bear was sitting on top of him. It kept clawing and biting at him with full force. After several hits, Andrew became unconscious, and the bear, sensing the threat had been neutralized, retreated back into the woods. Upon discovery, Andrew had already passed. His careless act of confronting the black bear head-on cost him his life. The next case is quite similar: inexperienced human and a deadly bear. A combination that often leads to tragedy. It was October 11th, 2018, inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. Stretching across more than 500,000 acres of rugged terrain, the park attracts millions of visitors every year. Dense forests, steep ridgelines, and countless miles of hiking trails make it one of the most visited national parks in the United States. That afternoon, park authorities received reports that a solo hiker had failed to return from a backcountry trail before sunset. As daylight began to disappear, a volunteer search and rescue team was assembled to assist park rangers. Among them was Katie Brooks. Katie was 45 years old. She had volunteered with local search and rescue organizations for nearly 12 years. She understood that every missing person represented a race against time. Experience had taught Katie countless lessons about the wilderness. Unfortunately, wildlife rarely follows human schedules. With winter approaching, bears enter a period of hyperphagia, dramatically increasing the amount of food they consume each day. Wildlife biologists routinely explain that black bears are not actively searching for encounters with people. They are searching for food. The problem arises when both happen to arrive at the same location. As darkness continued settling across the mountains, search teams divided into pairs to cover more ground while still following protocol to never work entirely alone. Each two-person team received a designated section of forest. Katie and her search partner, a younger volunteer named Dale, followed an old drainage leading away from the established trail system. The terrain grew increasingly difficult. Loose rocks covered the hillside.
Search and rescue personnel are trained to remain together whenever possible. The wilderness has a way of creating multiple emergencies instead of just solving the first one.
For nearly 2 hours, the search produced nothing. No footprints, no discarded equipment, no signs that the missing hiker had passed through the area. Then, Katie noticed something unusual: broken vegetation, freshly disturbed leaves. Under normal circumstances, she would have clocked it instantly as feeding sign, the kind of torn-up ground bears leave behind digging for roots or grubs. But the light was already failing. The pattern was partly obscured by rock, and 2 hours of nothing had left her hoping for anything that looked like progress. Some part of her hesitated, unconvinced, but the thought of the missing hiker taking refuge nearby was enough to push her past that doubt. The signs continued: bent branches, compressed ground, movement somewhere deeper inside the vegetation. Katie radioed a quick update and pushed on, still telling herself it could be a person. Every step reinforced that hope, with Dale close behind her. In reality, she was about to encounter a black bear that was twice her size. Upon getting in the line of sight of the bear, she realized she had made a grave mistake, and there was no turning back. She saw a feeding bear that had clearly noticed her presence. Even years of training couldn't fully suppress the instinct. She let out a sharp, involuntary shout before catching herself. It was enough. The sudden noise at close range startled the bear, and it read the disturbance as a threat, dropping into its defensive instincts. It struck Katie and knocked her off her feet, tearing through her jacket and leaving deep lacerations across her arm and shoulder as she raised them to protect her face. With a bear of this size, survival becomes the privilege of the fittest only. Katie knew that if the bear got a hold of her, it would not let go, so she went into fight mode and grabbed a nearby rock. When the bear came closer to attack again, she struck it, and Dale, shouting and waving his pack over his head to look larger, helped drive the animal back long enough for both of them to retreat. An encounter that definitely could have gone way differently if Katie and Dale hadn't acted fast. She came away from the ordeal with the lacerations, a broken wrist, and cracked ribs from the fall. Had she been alone, or had the bear pressed the attack a moment longer, her fate would have completely changed.
The next case demonstrates that not every dangerous animal survives by hunting large prey. Sometimes the most defensive ones are the ones people never see coming.
It was April 16, 2019, near Kanha National Park in Madhya Pradesh, India. As winter faded and temperatures began to rise, villages surrounding the forests entered one of the busiest times of the year. Before sunrise, families ventured into the woodlands to collect mahua flowers that had fallen overnight. This flower was insanely valued for its use. Singh Patel was 49 years old. He had lived beside these forests his entire life. Every spring, he followed the same routine his father and grandfather had practiced before him. He left home long before daylight, carrying woven baskets and the same sturdy walking stick he always brought into the woods, hoping to gather the freshest mahua flowers before the morning heat arrived. It was a routine he had repeated hundreds of times. Routine has a way of replacing logic. The more familiar people become with an environment, the easier it becomes to believe nothing has changed. In the world, nothing nothing ever stays the same. That particular morning, Singh entered a section of woodland where thick bamboo and shrubs reduced visibility to only a few meters. Fallen flowers covered the ground beneath several mature mahua trees, suggesting it would be a productive morning. He wasn't alone. Wildlife biologists later explained that sloth bears frequently visit mahua trees during flowering season. The sweet scent attracts both insects and bears, creating an unexpected overlap between human activity and wildlife. Unlike many other bear species that often move away after detecting people, sloth bears are well known for reacting defensively when surprised at close range.
The bear had likely been feeding quietly beneath the same tree for some time. Neither Singh nor the animal realized how little distance separated them. Every step narrowed the gap.
Singh rounded a thicket and found the bear almost at arm's length. With the stick already in his grip from the walkover, he raised it on instinct. The sloth bear interpreted the sudden movement as an attack and, in its most primal response, struck first. Singh was knocked down by the first strike, and the bear pressed the attack, clawing and biting at his chest and shoulders as he curled up beneath it. Growing up in the wilderness taught him to never stop fighting. He kept hold of the stick and swung at the bear again and again from the ground, landing blow after blow until the animal finally broke off and crashed away into the bamboo. More interested in escape than in finishing what it started, he escaped with a huge scar on his chest. He immediately alerted the seniors of the village, and they called the wildlife safety correspondents to assess the scene. Forest officials later renewed warnings advising villagers to collect mahua flowers after daylight whenever possible, travel in groups, and make noise while moving through dense vegetation. The final case takes us to one of the few places on Earth where people are constantly reminded that they are not the top predator. It was November 14, 2022, near Churchill, Manitoba, Canada, the small subarctic town widely known as the polar bear capital of the world. Along the western shores of Hudson Bay, every autumn, as sea ice begins forming across the bay, polar bears gather near the coastline, waiting for the ice to become thick enough to support their annual seal hunt. For wildlife photographers, this becomes a golden opportunity each year to showcase their best abilities. For residents, however, the bears are simply part of everyday life, but every person is always on guard. James Carter was 35 years old. A wildlife photographer from Oregon, he had spent years documenting animals across North America. Wolves in Yellowstone, moose in Alaska, mountain lions in Colorado. But one species had always remained at the top of his list: the polar bear. A name so potent, it strikes fear into the hearts of people. He joined a small photography expedition led by a local guide who had spent years running bear viewing tours along the coast. The rest of the group were fellow photographers, none of them locals, all relying on the guide's read of the animals and the terrain. The tour ran out of a reinforced tundra vehicle. It allowed James to observe bears while maintaining a safe distance. Before the journey was about to embark, every guest read special instructions from the wildlife authorities. Remain inside the vehicle. Do not separate from the group. If a bear is spotted nearby, wait for directions from the guide. The rules sounded robotic and monotone, but there is a reason why they existed in the first place, and James was about to find out why. Throughout the afternoon, James photographed several bears wandering in the wild. Most remained hundreds of meters away, occasionally stopping to investigate unfamiliar scents before continuing toward the coastline. Everything appeared calm. What he didn't realize was that it was the calm before the storm. As daylight began fading across the Arctic landscape, one large polar bear appeared in the distance, slowly moving across an open snowfield.
To James, it looked like the perfect photograph. To his guide, it looked like another reason to keep everyone exactly where they were.
The vehicle slowed down to allow James to click pictures and observe the animal in its natural setting. What James saw was a golden opportunity to showcase his photography. The guide had turned toward the front of the vehicle for a moment, radioing another tour buggy about the bear's position. And in that brief window, James eased the rear door open and slipped out to get a closer shot, something the vehicle's high step and the group's excited chatter helped mask just long enough. A deadly mistake. Polar bears are naturally curious animals, and in an environment with few objects and even fewer people, unfamiliar movement close by can quickly draw their attention, sometimes as a threat to investigate, sometimes as a potential meal. With each step James took away from the vehicle, the odds of the second grew. Upon taking a few photos, James heard the guide's voice sharply calling him back the moment she turned and saw him standing outside. He was already turning back toward the vehicle when the polar bear closed the distance and lunged at him. It seized James and and struck him repeatedly, an attack so vile that everyone in the vehicle turned pale. The remaining members immediately sprang into action, and the guide charged the vehicle forward, laying on the horn to drive the bear off. James cried out during the attack, but by the time the group managed to pull him clear and the bear retreated, his injuries, including wounds to his neck, were already fatal. He passed away within moments of being pulled to safety. Investigators would later explain that polar bears are naturally curious animals, and that in an environment with few objects and even fewer people, unfamiliar movement can quickly attract their attention. That is precisely why trained guides insist on strict viewing protocols. James didn't die because the polar bear dragged him out of the vehicle. He died because he chose to leave its safety himself. He mistook the white fuzzy giant for a passive animal, and that led to his overconfidence. And most often, overconfidence leads to doom.